have a question to ask you. Is there anything in all the world so scrumptious as the smell of grandmother's homemade whole wheat bread? Is there even a taste that you can think of better than this? I'm not sure I can. So today I hope you'll stay with us. In the next few minutes we're going to make my version of a no-knead multi-grain bread, and it's so easy. I really honestly think you can do this. I promise I've messed up too many times before to make empty promises. I think you can do this with me. I hope you'll stay with us. I am really excited to share this with you, and it's taken a lot of courage because I have ruined more loaves of bread or bricks of bread than I can even count over the years. So to take on the idea of making whole grain bread, which is usually one of the most difficult, and no-knead version of it, that's a lot to be claiming I can do in front of a camera, but I'm gonna trust that this is entirely successful, and hopefully you'll bake with me and see how easy it is to have a successful recipe come to fruition with no-knead multi-grain bread. Before we start, I want to give credit to two different people, and that is Artisan Bread with Steve, which is a fantastic YouTube channel. He is a genius at about every kind of bread you can make. And then there's a blog called Alexandra's Kitchen, and she has kind of a variation of this recipe as well. And because I have referred to both of them, I want to just make sure I give them credit because this is kind of a variation on what they started with their recipes. So get yourself a big, large bowl, preferably metal or glass, and let's get started. This is so simple, and just in case I say my words wrong and say tablespoon instead of teaspoon or such throughout this, make sure you check out the recipe below this video where I'll make sure I have the full recipe written out correctly so that you can get it right in your kitchen. I'm going to start with whole grain oats or old-fashioned oats. This is not the 5-minute version. This is simply old-fashioned oats. So remember that you don't want the 5-minute quick oats. That is different, and you need the nutrition that this holds in it. I'm going to put in exactly 1 3/4 cup, and I've already measured it out, but 1 3/4 cup of those oats. And then this is the secret ingredient that makes this so delicious. My mouth is watering. 3/4 cup of dark brown sugar. You could use light brown sugar too, but I like the more molassesy flavor of the dark brown sugar. Then I'm going to want 1 tablespoon. I know that sounds like a lot, but this makes a couple of loaves of bread. I'm going to put in 1 tablespoon of either kosher or sea salt. And let me get that measured out, and I'll throw that in there together. That looks about right. I think I got a little much, so I'm going to just put a little of that back. And lastly, to this first part of the recipe, I'm going to put in 3 cups of boiling water. We're going to throw it right in there with it. You can't mess it up yet. So here's 1 cup. 2 cups. And 3 cups. And if you're like me and you love the YouTube channel of Artisan Bread with Steve, he always has this little method of stirring his bread with the stick of his wooden spoon rather than the paddle part of it. And partly his reasoning behind that, as I understand it, is this is closer to like a dough hook, and the dough is not going to get all globbed up on the larger part of your spoon. So he just takes it and stirs it around real good like this. I'm going to do that right now. Just get that all mixed in there together, and once it's mixed in well, we're going to set this aside and let it come all the way down to room temperature. Now, just so you know, I've let those oats sit overnight, and I love it even better because the longer you let it set, the more tender they're going to get, and they just absorb that water in a beautiful way. I'm going to let them sit for about 30 minutes. They'll come to room temperature, and we'll throw in the rest of the ingredients. All right, it's almost been 30 minutes, and this is almost cool enough to room temperature. It should be ready in about the next 5 minutes. So when it's about that close, it's the perfect timing for me to get the yeast going. And I've got exactly 1/4 cup of lukewarm water. That means I can touch it with my finger and it feels about room temperature. I can't even tell when I have my finger in the water because it's just room temperature. I don't want it too cold, and I don't want it up there near boiling point. But lukewarm water, and I'm going to put in 2.5 teaspoons of active dry yeast. Now, that's the same equivalent as one of those little packets that you get at the store. So if you use the packages, that's fine. The reason I like this is when I'm going to get creative, which we are a little bit today, and add some extra grains to this, every grain is going to weight it down just a little bit more, and it's going to need just a smidgen more of yeast. So if I get it this way, I can fudge a little and put just a smidgen extra yeast in. So I'm going to put in 1 kind of rounded teaspoon over the top of that water, and we'll get 1 more kind of rounded teaspoon to pour over that, and it calls for 1/2 teaspoon extra, so 2.5 teaspoons, and I'm going to make this one just a little bit extra as well. There it is. All right, now what I do with this is some people leave it just sitting on top of the water. We don't need to add more sugar because we remember we have some sugar in here that it'll mix with. But I'm going to go ahead and just stir it up with my measuring spoon right there. And in about 5 minutes, we should see good bubbling happening if this is good yeast. If it doesn't bubble within 5 minutes, we know it's probably dead, probably just a little bit too long on the shelf. And having active yeast is very important. So meet me back here in 5 minutes and we'll see how well it's doing. 5 minutes have passed and the yeast is nice and bubbly. We're ready to use it in our recipe, but this is where the fun part comes in, because I told you this is multi-grain bread, and that means you could probably make it with as few or as many grains as you decide. You just kind of have to know a little bit about them. So we're going to put in 6 cups of flour altogether, but give or take just a smidgen. But we start with 3 cups of the best organic all-purpose flour that you've got. All right, so get your hands on some of that and put 3 cups in here like I have done in our bowl ready for us. Now we get to add 3 more cups, and I'm going to add 2 of them in just whole wheat flour. If you've got organic or home ground, that's the very best, but today I don't, so I'm just using from the store whole wheat flour, unbleached. I'll put 2 cups of that in. Now, I'll still have a 3rd cup, or that last cup, which actually will make the 6th one that I get to play with. Let me add 2 cups of this real quick. And you do want to measure pretty carefully. You don't want to round them up too much, so either have a knife nearby or use your finger or something, because you do want them to be pretty close to right level. This is a 3rd cup measurement I'm using, so I put in 3 and 3 again to equal the 2 cups that I need. Here's the 1, 2, 3. All right, so now I have got a total of 5 cups. If you've been watching, I've got 3 cups of all-purpose flour, 2 cups of whole wheat flour, and that very last cup that I'm going to put in here, I'm going to get a little bit creative, and I just want to encourage you to as well. What I had in the cabinet was some whole flax seed that I've saved. Actually, usually I store it in the freezer if I have room, just so it stays extra fresh. I had whole flax seed, and you can just mill it in your own either grain mill that you have. I don't have a nice big grain mill yet. I hope to someday very soon. But I do have a little coffee grinder that does a perfect job on it. So if you've got a little coffee grinder that's just made for herbs and spices and things, that's what you can mill up some flax seed with. And it holds its nutrition better if you keep it in this form until you need it, and then mill it right beforehand. So I'm going to put in about 1/2 cup of that, and I've got it right here in my little blue dish already waiting for it. And I'm going to add to that a few other things. So I happen to have on hand chia seeds. I'm going to put a little bit of those in, and poppy seeds. Now, these look a lot alike, but I want to you to keep in mind poppy seeds are great for multigrain bread, and they do not absorb a bunch of moisture. However, chia seeds, like you see here, they do absorb quite a bit of moisture. That's what makes them so wonderful. But because of that, if I'm going to add a little bit of this to my bread, I want to remember that if they're going to soak up some of the moisture, I might be ready to add just a little bit more water to this recipe if I need to. I just keep that in the back of my mind. So I'm not going to add a whole lot of those, but I probably will add maybe a tablespoon of chia and a tablespoon of poppy seeds right to this before I throw it in there with the rest of it. So there's 1 tablespoon. I'll put it in there with that first. And a tablespoon of poppy seeds. Let me just move this out here and we'll add it to that. That's pretty close. Put it right in there with those. I didn't have to add these separately, but just for fun, I was just showing you. I'll stir those up together. All right, and I'm gonna throw that in with this other flour, and we're gonna stir the flour up together. We don't really have to ahead of time, but it just makes sense that it would be better incorporated if we got some sort of a slotted spoon and stirred that flour mixture up together before we add it to the rest of the ingredients. This is going to be a wonderful bread, and I've gone just shy of that full 6 cups if you were paying attention closely, but we're right at about 6 cups of flour, and we'll add more or less if we need to get it the right consistency. It should be just about perfect though, if I've measured right. Some people like to use a sifter for this, and I do have my grandmother's flour sifter. That works perfect. It's just not required. All right, now let's put them all together. So I'm going to set this over to the side. Remember, we have this ready and nice and bubbly, and I'm going to pull this forward for us. This is what it looks like first. I mean, you could eat it if you remember. It's got sugar in there and salt and wonderful hot water. This is just like a breakfast meal. So if by chance you've got it setting on the counter, don't let your family accidentally think it's for them and eat it before it's time to make bread with it. We're going to pour in the mixture of water and yeast. And I'll stir that together just lightly so that it's incorporated, and then we'll start pouring the flour in. And we put the flour in at just about 1 to 2 cups at a time and stir it in real good so that it has a chance to all incorporate. And we'll use that spoon handle and just get it nice and incorporated before we pour in some more. He does something fancy where he always starts at the outside and goes into the middle. I don't know that I've mastered that, but I think it's a good idea. About like your dough hook would do if you were doing it in a mixer. You gotta have some strong arms, I'll tell you that. That's pretty good. I'm gonna pour some more in. If it starts looking like it's going to be too dry, I go ahead and get a little bit of more moisture in there right away instead of waiting till it's all the way finished. And I do think I'm going to add just a little bit of more moisture in the form of probably a little bit of lukewarm water. I don't want to use boiling water, and I don't want to use cold water because I want that yeast to stay happy and keep going. So let me grab just a little bit of lukewarm water to add to this to keep it moist so we can pour in the last of that flour. I just want it to be stirrable even if it's hard on my arm. I think we're about ready for that last bit of flour. too dry, then I'll know it won't rise as well. And we want it to get a nice high rise, especially with this whole wheat flour that's kind of heavier than regular flour. All right, I think I've got it just about perfect. I don't want to stir the daylights out of it, but I do want it to be all well incorporated. I want it to be moist, but not too moist. I don't want it watery, and I think I've got it just about right. So I'm going to go ahead and scrape that off in there. We're going to cover it with saran wrap and let this rest for 2 hours. Now remember, this is no-knead bread, so we're not going to have to knead it or anything, but we need it to be in a good spot for proofing. And the best places I've found are a couple of things I'll share with you. First, let me get this over the top. This just keeps the moisture in. You could also put kind of a barely damp kitchen towel over this, and that would work fine as well. But the places I've found that it proofs well are if you have a fireplace and it's in the winter, oftentimes you can set this next to it, and every time you go by it, just kind of turn it half a turn. Or you could put it in the microwave like you see I've got above me. I have a microwave that has one of these under microwave lights, and if I don't use the microwave but set this in there and turn the light on underneath it, kind of radiates some nice heat up into that chamber and is a perfect little spot for proofing the bread. Another spot people like to put it is on top of the refrigerator, where there's just enough warmth that's radiating up to keep it somewhere around that, oh, I don't know, about 80 degrees. And it's perfect for letting that bread rise. So we're gonna let this sit for about 2 hours or until it has doubled. That may be more or less for you, depending on your altitude, also depending on the humidity in the air, and a number of factors, just how much moisture and such is in here. But give or take 2 hours or until it's doubled, and I'll meet you back here then. It's been about 2 hours, and as it nears the finish line, I can see that our dough has doubled. I had it in the microwave with the light on underneath. It was perfect for proofing it and keeping it just moist enough that it didn't dry out on top as it rose. Now, I can make 2 large loaves with this batch. However, I love to make a couple of small loaves so I can give them away as gifts. So I usually make 1 large loaf pan full of bread and then 2 small loaves, and you've just got to at least try it in a cast iron skillet, because everything is better in cast iron, in my opinion. I'm going to oil this up because even though the cast iron has that oily surface, it's not quite enough for this. And then I like to go ahead and make sure that everything has a coating of flour. This is optional, it's not required. Some people, in fact, cut a parchment paper and put in the bottom of each of these. But to me, it seems like the bread doesn't get that nice, perfect crust on the bottom if I use parchment paper. So I kind of just oil them up with some good butter and then spread some all-purpose flour around in there. All right, we're ready to use the bread dough that we've got risen. We want to carefully lift the top of it off. Sometimes I'll even put butter on this so that it won't stick once it touches the saran wrap. You might keep that in mind. I'm thankful that this is nice and moist, but the minute I touch it here, and I'm going to just squeeze it in half with my hands are going to get pretty gooey, and this is going to deflate quickly, but that's what you need to expect. So here I go. We'll just kind of pull it in half, and you can see how sticky my hands have gotten. I could tell when I reached my hands in that I had just a little bit too much moisture in this, and I was going to have a sticky mess, and I still will, but it's nothing that we can't salvage. That's why I'm going to tell you to go over to Artisan Bread with Steve to get the right information, because he always does it perfect and never seems to make mistakes like I'm very prone to. I got just a little bit too much moisture in this. But I've gone and floured my hands, for one thing. Secondly, I've got myself a spatula so I can kind of scrape it gently off of the sides so that it doesn't get too damaged through that. But I'm still going to just cut it in half and put 1/2 in the large loaf pan very gently and separate the rest into these 3. So meet me back here in a minute after the mess that I make, but we'll get it in there with no problem. All right, I've got them in their pans now, and I'll just admit they would look smoother on top and have just a little bit more floury looking surface if I had added just the right amount of moisture. I think I tried to overcompensate by adding that chia seed, and then knowing that it would take in some of the water on its own, I added just a little bit more water than I needed to. So you can keep that in mind, and all of this is not a science. It's something that you kind of learn as an art, and I have not mastered it yet, but I know these are going to turn out great. They just might look more artisanal is what I'm going to say. So what we're doing now is, without kneading them or doing anything other than getting them into each of the pans, we're going to lay another semi-moist cloth over the top of them and let them rest until all of them have got the bread at least to the level of the little edge here. And usually you're looking at the largest pan for that, because these smaller pans probably are already technically as high or higher than the edge of the pan. But on the regular sized bread pan, you're looking for it to raise just a little bit until it's at least the height of the sides, and you know, okay, that's when it's time to go ahead and bake. Now, since this won't take very long for it to rise that much, we're going to go ahead and preheat the oven to about 425, and you gauge it for wherever you are if you'd like. But what we're going to do is put them in the oven when they're ready here in just a few minutes on 425 for about 10 minutes, and then we'll lower it to 350 and bake them for an additional 40 to 45 minutes until they're perfectly golden on top. That first 10 minutes kind of helps them raise that last time and get the perfect little brownness on top that we want by the time they're done. Oh, they're perfect. All right, we'll get them in the oven. See, that one is perfectly over the edge. We have about 6 minutes left of that 40-minute timer that was set, and incidentally, they appear to be done. Might be because I made smaller loaves, and so we've only got one large loaf in the oven. I'm not sure, but they look done, so let's get them out, and I'll set them on the counter, and I like to lay them over on their sides so that they just retain the height. And I don't know if that works or not. That's just what Grandma did, so I have to do it in commemoration of her anyway. So here we go. When you hear that tapping sound that's like hollow a little bit on top, and they're nice and golden, you can bet that that's, do you hear that? It's the perfect sound you want to hear to know that they are just right done. I wish you could smell this. It's so delicious. And it turned out so perfect. I couldn't even ask for it to turn out any better. But we got 2 small golden loaves, a round medium-sized loaf, and then 1 perfect large loaf that I'll save when I have company over. So I'm gonna go ahead and cut this, even though it's still pretty warm, but I just can't wait to share a bite of it with you and at least let you see what it looks like inside. With a little bit of butter, you can see how perfect that looks. Let me just show it to you that way. Oh, it's so yummy looking. I smeared a little bit of butter over the top. Let me get a better knife really quick. I'll be right back. This is a knife. And grandmother would always turn it over on its side because she wanted it to stay as high and lofty as she could, even when she was cutting it. I don't know if that's a real thing or not, but I might try that next time. There is a perfect little piece of bread. I can't wait. I'm going to smear a little butter on it right now while we're talking, because it just is begging for a little bit of butter. Oh yeah, the more the better. I wish you were here to eat this with me, and I'm going to enjoy it now with a cup of soup, but I hope that you'll take the time to subscribe and hit that bell if you haven't already. Share this video with someone you love, and let us hear your favorite, especially whole wheat bread or multigrain bread recipes down below. We would love to hear from you. Until I see you again, God bless you, and go out and be a blessing to someone else today. Hey, before you go, let me share you this quick verse of scripture. This is out of the book of John in the Holy Bible, chapter 3, verse 16. It says this: "For God so loved the world that he gave his only Son, so that whoever believes in him will not perish, but have everlasting life." Now go spread the word.